morning, all. Welcome to the Dóchas EU Presidency Launch event. My name is Shona Murray. I'm your moderator for this morning and into the early afternoon. And as we all know, this day next week, Ireland is assuming the presidency of the European Council. And while we know the key role of that amongst member states who take on that position is to be an impartial, honest broker, the government, of course, does have the opportunity to bring with it a list of priorities as it aims to compromise and broker compromise amongst all the 27 member states in one of the most contentious issues that exists within European policy making, which is the 7-year multi-annual framework, the EU budget over 7 years. But within the European Union, Ireland does have a reputation as a principled, committed driver of development, of humanitarian policy, and also supportive of the domestic civil society sector. So it is expected by EU member states that Ireland will bring that voice directly into the EU negotiations for the budget. But also, as we're all too aware, we are living through multiple overlapping crises. On top of that, there is massive funding cuts, particularly the ongoing crisis that comes from the gutting of USAID. So what's agreed between now and Christmas, which is the duration of the presidency, will shape EU development policy for the next 7 years and potentially beyond that. But also, in addition to that, we know that as the Ukraine war grinds on and Russian aggression threatens the stability of Europe, including almost daily incursions by Russian drones or other forms of hybrid war into neighbouring states such as the Baltics or Finland, there is also a strong consensus that the EU needs to prioritise security and defence in this budget like never before. And that is most likely at the sacrifice of other budgetary issues. So while 6 months is brief, there is an opportunity for Ireland to assure that this civil society piece, humanitarian piece, that is kept at the forefront while these really tough negotiations take place. Now, over the course of today, and particularly our two panels, we'll hear just what the EU should and what the EU can do regarding the protection of this space within the budget. But first, I'd like to welcome to the stage Jane-Ann McKenna, CEO of Dóchas. She is here. There you go. The floor is yours, Dina.
Thanks very much, Shona. I'm delighted to see you all here this morning. Today we are very proud to launch the Future Development Cooperation Civil Society's ambition for Ireland's EU presidency. And you should have a copy of the paper there on your chair. This paper represents the collective voice of Ireland's development and humanitarian organisations. Drawing on decades of experience and robust evidence from our members and European partners, it offers a constructive and ambitious vision for Ireland's European presidency, which comes at a critical time for Europe. In the coming months, decisions will be taken that will shape the European Union's external action for the next decade. Its long-term budget will ultimately define the kind of global actor the EU wants to be. These decisions are taking place against a backdrop of profound geopolitical uncertainty. Conflicts are proliferating and becoming more protracted, humanitarian needs continue to rise, climate change is accelerating and compounding fragility, and food insecurity is worsening. At the same time, many governments are reducing their aid budgets and increasingly framing development cooperation through the lens of security, migration, and strategic competition. This is the context in which Ireland will assume the presidency. We welcome the priorities set by the Irish government. It's encouraging to see a strong emphasis on defending European values, strengthening democracy and the rule of law, supporting an open and rules-based international order. These are the foundations on which Ireland has built its international reputation. During the presidency, Ireland will be called upon to act both as a strategic leader and an honest broker, helping to build consensus among member states on the EU's long-term priorities. The next multi-annual financial framework, or MFF, will be the clearest expression of the Union's political priorities and will determine how Europe engages with the world operationally for the next decade. Over the past week alone, we've seen significant developments on the EU external direction. Member states have adopted the Council conclusions on Global Gateway and agreed a partial negotiating mandate on the future Global Europe instrument as part of MFF negotiations. The EU is actively redefining how it engages with the world. And we believe that Ireland is well placed to ensure this evolution strengthens rather than dilutes the EU's commitment to poverty alleviation, which is the main mandate for development cooperation as per the EU treaty. Indeed, if values are to be the defining theme of the Irish presidency, then safeguarding a strong, principled and person-centred external action agenda should be one of its clearest expressions. Development cooperation is not a luxury to be revisited in difficult times. It is an essential investment in a safer, more prosperous and more resilient world. That's the central message of our paper that we're launching today. It presents our vision of Ireland as a model power, a country that leads not through its size, but through its values, credibility and commitment to principled international engagement, a commitment to those who are furthest behind. The recent Council conclusions on Global Gateway contain encouraging language in this direction regarding sustainability, local ownership, transparency and engagement with civil society and partner countries. We welcome this, but it now must be translated into practice. As many civil society organisations across Europe have pointed out, including our colleagues from Concord here today, accountability, transparency and meaningful participation will determine whether this ambition succeeds. Ireland's presidency provides an opportunity to ensure that these principles remain at the heart of the MFF and EU policy development. It's also an opportunity to reaffirm civil society as an indispensable partner in shaping and delivering EU external action. Effective development cooperation depends on meaningful engagement with local organisations, affected communities and those whose voices are too often excluded from decision-making, including women, youth and people with disabilities. Many critical decisions, including funding levels and spending priorities, still lie ahead. Ireland should steer an agreement which will maintain a strong commitment to the Global Europe instrument by allocating at least 10% of its budget to EU external action. The Global Europe instrument must preserve the integrity of official development assistance, maintaining substantial investment in human development, safeguard support for fragile and conflict-affected contexts, and provide predictable, dedicated funding for civil society organisations. It means reinstating previous existing financial commitments with earmarked funds. While blended finance and guarantees have an important role to play, they cannot replace grant-based funding, particularly in fragile contexts where poverty eradication, localisation and risk sharing require public investment. Development finance should ultimately be judged not by the volume of capital mobilised, but whether it improves people's lives and reduces poverty and inequality. The third pillar of our recommendations is a renewed focus on fragility, peace building and principled humanitarian action. Humanitarian crises, as you all know, have reached record levels while resources are under unprecedented pressure. Ireland has consistently championed a humanitarian action that is neutral, impartial and independent. That principled approach should remain central to the EU external action. But humanitarian assistance alone is not enough. Lasting peace requires long-term investment in governance, conflict prevention, resilience, social protection and local leadership. Development cooperation is one of the most effective tools available to address the root causes of instability. It helps build societies that are more resilient to conflict, better able to withstand climate shocks, and more capable of creating opportunities for future generations. This is why Ireland should operationalise the humanitarian development peace nexus under the Global Europe instrument. A long-term commitment to the most fragile countries is needed, one that is not reliant on geopolitical relationships. Ireland should push EU member states to make progress on a renewed approach to the Sahel, an approach that will be based on Ireland's own experience in the region, working through civil society and local authorities where partnerships with governments are no longer possible. Ireland should use its presidency to foster greater consensus among member states to support coordinated humanitarian and diplomatic efforts in response to the crises in the Middle East, Sudan and other conflict-affected contexts. Our fourth priority is food security and nutrition. Ireland has long demonstrated international leadership in this area, informed by our own history and strengthened through decades of partnership with communities around the world. Today, conflict remains the primary driver of acute food insecurity and malnutrition for millions around the world, with famine emerging in both Gaza and Sudan in the same year. This is unprecedented. Food and nutrition security is fundamental to health, education, economic opportunity, peace and stability. Investing in fighting malnutrition is a smart investment that brings a high return. Our paper therefore calls on Ireland to use its presidency to elevate food security and nutrition as strategic priorities within the EU external action and to ensure sustained investment in resilient and equitable food systems. Beyond financial commitment, we need a clear political direction through a renewed EU nutrition action plan. Our fifth priority is a just and equitable climate agenda. Climate change is already undermining development gains across the globe, with the greatest impact falling on those who have contributed least to the problem. Ireland has earned international respect through its commitment to grant-based finance, climate finance and partnerships with vulnerable countries. Its presidency offers an opportunity to reinforce European leadership on adaptation, loss and damage and just transition, while ensuring that climate finance complements rather than displaces broader development objectives. COP31 will take place during Ireland's presidency, and the continued negotiations on the EU post-2030 climate framework will offer opportunities for Ireland to defend a more inclusive approach to climate finance for fragile and conflict-affected countries. To conclude, I would like to say that we are encouraged by the ambition already expressed by the Irish Government for the presidency. Our paper is intended to complement that ambition by highlighting how concretely Europe's external action can embody these same values in practice, from the design of the next multiannual financial framework to the implementation of Global Gateway and the future of international partnerships. Our 5 key recommendations for the Irish presidency are championing a values-based EU external action agenda that reaffirms the principles of the European Consensus for Development. Secondly, safeguarding an ambitious and accountable Global Europe instrument that protects ODA integrity, prioritises human development in fragile contexts, and strengthens democratic oversight and civil society participation. Thirdly, place conflict prevention, peace building and principled humanitarian action and respect for international law at the centre of the EU's response to global fragility and instability. Place food security and nutrition as strategic EU priorities through renewed political leadership, sustainable financing and support for resilient food systems. And lastly, advance a just and equitable EU climate change agenda by increasing adaptation and loss and damage financing, supporting a fair transition away from fossil fuels and prioritising the needs of vulnerable communities. I want to express my sincere thanks to the Dóchas members whose expertise, evidence and practical experience have shaped this paper. Their work alongside communities around the world gives these recommendations both their credibility and their urgency. I also wish to acknowledge our colleagues across European civil society networks whose participation and collaboration continue to strengthen our shared vision for a values-based European external action. And finally, I'd like to thank all of today's speakers and participants. Your insights and engagement are essential as we prepare for Ireland's presidency and the important choices that lie ahead. The publication of this paper is not an end to a conversation. It's an invitation to the Irish Government to work together to ensure that Ireland's presidency helps shape a European Union that remains outward-looking, principled and committed to international solidarity. Because in a world marked by instability, conflict and growing fragmentation, principled partnership is not a luxury. It's the foundation of Europe's credibility, its resilience and its lasting influence in the world. And with that, we have a short video, I believe, just articulating some of those key priorities by our members. Thank you.
Ireland needs to champion a values-based EU external action agenda, reaffirming the principles of the European Consensus for Development, rooted in poverty eradication, human rights, the rule of law, gender equality, and meaningful partnership with civil society. It's time for Ireland to lead the EU toward a more just and accountable global future.
As Ireland prepares for the EU presidency, we have the chance to lead with our values. We can champion an ambitious Global Europe instrument, but also one that is transparent and accountable.
We need to protect the integrity of overseas development aid, ensuring that aid goes directly to the people who need it most, especially those in fragile contexts.
During the next 6 months and beyond, conflict prevention, peace building and humanitarian action must be put right at the centre of the EU's response to global crisis.
This is the moment to ensure that respect for the rule of law, including adherence to international law, drives every decision that Europe makes on the world stage.
The upcoming Irish presidency is a chance for us to elevate global food security and nutrition into strategic EU priorities. It is a chance for us to champion renewed political leadership, secure sustainable financing, and actively support food systems that are both resilient and equitable for all.
The presidency is an opportunity for Ireland to advance a fair and equitable EU climate policy by advancing financing for loss and damage and climate adaptation, by focusing on a just transition away from fossil fuels and prioritising the most vulnerable communities.
The Irish presidency provides us with the perfect opportunity to champion global citizenship and to counter mis- and disinformation regarding civil society. Now more than ever, we need to stand firm in our support for the provision of and funding for global citizenship education.
Ireland takes on the EU presidency at a time of exceptional challenge in international relations, with many traditional assumptions under threat. I hope that Ireland will play the leadership role within the EU, of which I know it is fully capable, a role which will involve ensuring that the EU's external action remains values-driven, poverty-focused and grounded firmly in respect for international law. These are characteristics which have always defined Ireland's own development cooperation programme and its humanitarian work. I know that others in the EU are looking to Ireland to provide leadership on these issues. I have no doubt that Irish ministers will lead effectively from the outset and will set a course for the EU which will put values ahead of transactional politics and which I believe we can be truly proud of.
Ireland's presidency of the European Council comes at a critical time for international development cooperation. Over the next 6 months, Dóchas will create the space for policy dialogue and exchange with key stakeholders. We will support organisations to build their understanding and awareness on global Europe, and we will mobilise the public on the role of the EU in international partnerships. To find out more about our events and how you can participate, visit our website.
Now I'd like to welcome to the floor Peter Power, Head of the European Commission representation in Ireland.
Good morning. My name is Peter Power and I'm the Head of the European Commission representation here in Dublin. We have satellite offices throughout the Member States. We act as the ears and eyes of the Commission. We set up meetings for the Commission, we engage with civil society, and I'm thrilled to have been asked to speak to you this morning. Obviously, the global context is very challenging at present. When multilateralism and cooperation are under attack, civil society organisations are on the front line. This is why your work is so essential and why the European Commission remains such a strong supporter of the work of civil society. Sustainable economic progress and security, both the EU and our partner countries, cannot be achieved without a vibrant civil society and respect for human rights. We want civil society to be at the heart of the partnerships we build, including Global Gateway, our external investment agenda. As those on the ground, you understand the needs of local communities and people. Indeed, during the visit to Dublin recently of Commissioner Michael, he spoke of the essential role that civil society organisations play in reaching communities that sometimes institutions cannot reach. You ensure that the EU's investment are rooted in reality and our projects are of the highest standards of integrity and sustainability. We are grateful for the ongoing dialogues and consultations that have been put in place. whether it's the Policy Forum for Development or the Global Gateway of Civil Society and Local Authority Advisory Platform. Through regular meetings, you give us important feedback, and in turn, we rely on you to keep local members informed of the Global Gateway implementation. We look to strengthening our dialogue at all levels, and an ambition reflected in the recently adopted EU Civil Society Strategy. An overarching priority for Ireland's presidency will be to facilitate agreement on the EU's long-term budget, the 2028-2034 multi-financial framework. Last July, the Commission proposed an ambitious €200 billion budget on Global Europe, the main financing instrument for external action. This represents a 74% nominal increase compared to the current levels. The design of the Global Europe proposal is guided by 4 principles: simplification of existing funds, coherence, balancing predictability and stability, and achieving greater impact. In the overall MFF picture, Global Europe is an evolution rather than a revolution. It builds on the experience of the Neighbourhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument and all other external financing instruments. In the last few years, the international humanitarian system has been shaken to its core. The recently adopted communication on humanitarian aid, alongside the staff working document on the EU's integrated approach to fragility, delivers a comprehensive framework and guidance to operationalise the EU's response to fragile contexts. As a key component of this effort will be the involvement of diverse stakeholders in a Team Europe approach, including international financial institutions, the private sector, local actors, and other traditional entities. Civil society actors are also an important partner in financial contexts. Global Europe will continue to boost resilience and promote stability by addressing fragility in the humanitarian development peace nexus approach, as well as post-conflict recovery and reconstruction needs. Food security and nutrition have been at the centre of geopolitical and geoeconomic competition for several years. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has significantly intensified global food insecurity. In response, Team Europe has scaled up support to global food security through 4 pillars: solidarity, production, trade, and multilateralism, for which it has mobilised €18 billion between 2022 and 2024. This effort combines short-term assistance with investment in food systems resilience, promoting an open and transparent trade environment. Through Global Gateway, the EU supports sustainable agricultural systems, related infrastructure, and innovation. The EU is also championing multilateral initiatives like the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, with its unique partnership approach to Nutritional for Growth Summit. Another heatwave across Europe this week is a grim reminder that we're all living through climate change. But of course, we should never forget that the worst consequences of climate change fall disproportionately on those who contribute least to the problem. The EU is the largest climate finance donor in the world. In 2024, the European Union and its member states contributed €31 billion in climate change finance. Under the Global Gateway strategy, supporting renewable energy projects is a key focus, with well over half of all Global Gateway financing flagships focused on energy and climate. Examples include the Africa-Europe Green Energy Initiative, which aims to support the development of at least 50 gigawatts of renewable electricity in Africa and provide at least 100 million people with access to electricity by 2030. Similarly, the EU is mobilising increased ambition in the energy sector in sub-Saharan Africa, through the Scaling Up Renewables in Africa campaign launched together with South Africa in 2024. In conclusion, the 6 months put Ireland at the heart of the European Union policy making. Acting as an honest broker, Ireland will seek to move the agenda of the Member States forward across a number of important policy areas. Dóchas Priorities paper is an important contribution to some of the key debates that will take place around this during the presidency. I hope you have a productive discussion, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. Thank you very much.
That's a brilliant start to this morning. Before we move on to our first panel, we have a video message from the EU Commissioner Michael McGrath, who's the Commissioner for Democracy, Justice, the Rule of Law and Consumer Protection.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to address you at the launch of your priorities for the upcoming Irish presidency of the Council of the European Union. At a time of growing global instability, shrinking civic space, and increasing pressure on democratic values, civil society organisations are more important than ever. They are the watchdogs of our democracies, and they help turn our shared values, human dignity, equality, freedom, democracy, human rights and the rule of law, into lived reality. Across the world as well, civil society organisations are indispensable partners in development cooperation and humanitarian action. They bring local knowledge, public trust, expertise and long-term commitment. They help to build stronger democracies, more resilient societies and more responsive institutions. Ireland's strong and vibrant civil society is a real example of partnership in action, a reminder that when government and civil society work together with mutual respect, transparency and shared purpose, they can achieve lasting impact. And Dóchas and its members have been critical in shaping Ireland's reputation as a country that consistently punches above its weight in promoting global justice and sustainable development. Today, I know you will be discussing your shared ambitions for the upcoming Irish presidency. Your voice will play an important role in shaping its priorities and action. The future of development cooperation must be rooted in partnership. Partnership with communities who are directly affected by global challenges. Partnership with civil society who bring experience, accountability and grounded expertise. And partnership based on shared values. In this context, Dóchas can contribute to the work of the upcoming Irish presidency by helping to ensure that civil society perspectives are reflected, strengthened and integrated into Ireland's approach to development cooperation. So let me thank you for your outstanding leadership that you continue to show and for the work you do every day to protect the most vulnerable and to advance a more just, sustainable and equal world. I wish you a very successful conference today and most importantly, a very successful Irish presidency of the Council of the European Union. Thank you very much.
So a lot to discuss this morning. I want to introduce our first panel. It's entitled Civil Society in a New Era of Development, Cooperation, Opportunities and Challenges, where we'll get to discuss a lot of what was being referred to this morning by Jane Ann and also by Peter Power. Can I welcome onto the stage our panellists, Dr. Moses Usuba, Executive Director of Uganda National CSO Platform, Celia Cranfield, Head of Policy at Concord Europe, Marlene Halsner, Head of Unit at the Civil Society Organisations, Local Authorities and Foundations at DG for International Partnerships at the European Commission, and Sean Farrell, CEO of Troca. You're very welcome, everybody. Thank you so much. I think there's a lot to get to, and I will also point out that we will come to the audience to ask a few questions to the panellists. I'm sure you've got a lot that you'd like to discuss. But I was going to start off with you, Moses. Jane just mentioned there a lot about how the EU's sort of lens when it comes to development is being moved towards the area of sort of strategic partnerships and critical partnerships, rather than the traditional sort of neutral focus on development. What's your own position on that?
Thank you. I think it raises up a very important aspect that the European Union is moving away from the traditional approach of aid and moving at a way in which it can actually work with civil society organizations as partners. And currently, right now, the European Union is really pivotal in supporting over 80 countries with the European Union supporting of an enabling environment project. And this is not an ordinary grant, as it were. It's a model of partnership where civil society organizations are able to provide an analysis, provide evidence, and this evidence then goes upstream to the EU delegations and EU institutions and for quick analysis, quick engagement and dialogue. And that's what the kind of support that us in the South are looking for. But even now, more strategically, it's also important to note that as the European Union takes on the Global Gateway as its main investment vehicle worldwide, it's going to be cardinally important that the civil society organizations, especially us in the South, we're not being looked at just as implementers, but strategic partners, knowledge holders, and early warning alert actors. And that way we can then be able to have a meaningful engagement with the European Union in terms of providing safe spaces for dialogue, for protection, and that would also make the European Union an early listener, understand better, and be able to be a vehicle for development. So all I can say is that we are looking towards a situation where civil society organizations are not just implementing vehicles, but they are the democratic infrastructure, they're the fabric for delivering development. So as we really at this space launching the Irish presidency, we cannot really expect anything less, because it's at a time when aid is tumbling. The world is completely changing. The global philanthropy ecosystem has drastically changed. Many of us in the South were working under constrained civic space. And I think there is an opportunity, an enormous opportunity for the European Union to be a pace setter, for the European Union to look at civil society organizations as partners, for the European Union not to only create country-led initiatives, but also to ensure that country-led doesn't mean government only, but ensuring that civil societies are part and parcel of the conversation.
Celia, do you want to come in there and tell us a little bit about the European Global Gateway Initiative and how you see that evolving in terms of how development and humanitarian priorities exist within the European Union?
Yeah, thanks, Shona, and thanks to Dóchas as well. We're partners in this project for the presidency and really excited to work with you for the next 6 months. So, I mean, you heard it from the Commission representative this morning. The Global Gateway, it's an evolution, not a revolution. And in fact, what we've seen through this Global Gateway, which the strategy has existed since 2022, but it consolidated something that happened before that, throughout this current EU budget cycle, that the EU was focusing more and more on working together as member states, what they call the Team Europe approach, which CSOs had called for a long time for better donor coordination. We saw lots of other things come with this Team Europe approach, but also that through the programming there was a focus on sort of digital, transport, energy, and these things were kind of consolidated then in the Global Gateway strategy. And the idea is that they kind of secured the EU's green and digital transition while also putting sustainable development and the EU's values at the core of how this is done. And it's been very explicitly about competing with other actors geopolitically, like China.
Mainly.
Yeah. But what it has done is it's reshaped where aid is going quite concretely. So we've seen more and more of the EU budget for aid flowing back through member states and their agencies. And for us, when we're looking at funding for civil society, that's become a bit of a challenge because it's hard to see where it goes once the member states are implementing. We've seen more and more of a role for private sector and more and more of a role for different forms of financing, not just concessional grants, but also loans and things like that. But what that has really meant is that ODA from the EU institutions from 2020 to 2024 has more than halved. So it went from 23% 23-point-something% to 11%, which is quite a steep drop quite quickly. And we have the sense also that less and less is going to civil society. So in terms of opportunities, Moses is right. There's a really strong track record there from the Commission, different tools in the toolbox, different approaches that are really, really helpful. And Michael McGrath was just talking about the civil society strategy, which sort of anchors this approach in the EU's external relations as well. And I think that's an opportunity to build on. But the Global Europe Instrument, so this new proposal for the aid funding to come, is an opportunity. The negotiations are ongoing. It needs to be anchored in the language that the values and objectives of EU's international cooperation are putting partner countries' interests first, are including funding for civil society. And there are ways to do that also that go beyond language into things that sort of constrain a little bit the EU's room for maneuver in some way. They want more flexibility now because the world has been changing so fast.
You mean they want, when you say they want more flexibility, do you think that they want more flexibility to include things like security, defence, or what do you mean by that, like that, how things are changing?
Yeah, I mean, they've reduced how much they've said has to be aid in the EU's external budget. Right. They are looking to different modalities that can fund different types of actors. They're saying explicitly European private sector can now be funded this way.
Such as in what way would the private sector be funded then?
Well, they're suggesting that grants to the private sector, European private sector, could come from this instrument. And that is sort of a concrete expression of the evolution that we've seen with the Global Gateway, because we've seen European private sector interests as part of this, securing the EU's green and digital transition. But there are other opportunities apart from the negotiations on the Global Europe, because very quickly, and it's going to start right now, is the programming of this instrument. And so this means that civil society around the world, like Moses and other colleagues, should be engaging with the EU at country level to start talking about what they see the priorities should be.
And just before I move on to Marlene, Celia, just the point that you made there about, I think you said less than half of the developed money is going back into the civil society sector. Is that what you said?
Oh no. So the funding for least developed countries from the EU institutions has halved from 2020 to 2024. The civil society funding, we don't know if it's halved. We're not saying it's halved.
Yeah.
We're saying that it's become harder and harder to trace exactly who the final recipients of EU funding are, because of the modalities chosen where the EU works through different agencies.
And are you seeing the impact of that on the ground directly?
Well, we're hearing from a lot of our members that they see fewer opportunities to work directly with the EU. Yeah. They feel a weakening often of that relationship with the EU that they've found so valuable, not just for their funding, but also as a strategic kind of interlocutor.
Okay. Yeah. Marlene, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this morning as well, coming over from Brussels. How do you respond to what Celia has said there? Just in relation to, I suppose, the weakening of the approach, it appears from what we're hearing, to development and to really vulnerable countries and actors.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and also have a real exchange and hear later on from the audience how they reflect and how they see what we do, and possibly also how we can improve. I'm working in Brussels and very closely with Concord, and in this way also indirectly with you, and also Moses, although we have not met, but he is part of our EUC project, which I'm very proud of. He mentioned it. I didn't want to mention it at the very beginning, but it's very deep to my heart, and I'm happy that he mentioned it, because I think we all share the concern of restricting civic space in Europe and also in the world. And that's why we have put in place this huge project in 80 countries in the world, which is almost 80% of the countries I'm responsible for. It's 100, where with the civil society. So it's not that the European Commission is implementing it, but we gave it completely to civil society, to Civicus, to Foros. And what they do is, in these 80 countries, they, with their own eyes and ears, they know, they see where's a restriction of civic space. And if there is a deterioration, they will have a sort of alarm going on and reports that will go to our offices, but they will also kind of declenche or enable a small grant of money which can be given in a couple of weeks, whereby in specific countries then they can pay lawyers or any campaign in the country to make sure that maybe a draft legislation where they really make it impossible from the civil society to work, that this can be stopped or can be at least be not as bad as it is. And I'm happy that Moses is here because he's part of one of these platforms in Uganda. Now, why I'm saying this, because I'm here in a rather difficult situation. I'm here to defend. They have criticized what we're doing. And I just wanted you to show with these examples and with what Moses is doing, that I do not share really we are here to have different views of what we do as the European Commission. So this project, which is like half of what I manage in Brussels, is entirely civil society led. I'm very proud of this because we all talk about civic space, right? Yeah. Shrinking. But there's nothing like this with these 50 million that we put aside, where it is civil society led, 80 countries in the world, not the OECD, not the United Nations, nobody's doing that. Something really concrete where, and I hope he gives some examples, where we helped in this space. The second point why I'm making this, and it's very important for me, is that what you heard of Global Gateway in this new strategy, yes, we will finance private sector. Yes, we're giving a lot of loans to the governments. Yes, we're investing in transport, in environment, in health. And if you look at it in a kind of first thing, you think there's a dichotomy. There's not going money directly to hospitals and to schools. And you might have this view, there's something going in the wrong direction. While we see it as a tool. And we say, and this is explicitly written in this communication, which has established the Global Gateway, is that we all do that only for the benefit of the local people. Not for the governments, not for the dictators, not for the private sector, we do it for the local people. So what Moses is doing in all these 80 countries, for me, is the precondition, because if civil society cannot speak, it's not allowed to speak from the government. I mean, how can civil society be a strategic partner? In Vietnam, for example, we were not even allowed to invite the civil society to meet our commissioner because the Vietnamese government will not allow it. We're just allowed as the EU to talk to those civil society where we give money and just about money. So my first condition to talk with civil society around the world is that I try to help where it is possible to stop a deterioration or even do a little bit as I can, right? The second thing is that in the rollout of these, let's say, huge investments, whether it's a transport, a road, a railway station, a harbor, or it's in environment in general, we do talk to civil society on the ground. And I'm very proud that last year, in really all the 100 countries I'm responsible for, we have given very precise instruction what they should do. In the past, and I have reports because every year, and you know it because it's public, right? I ask all about the offices. Do you talk with civil society? Whom civil society you do? What you do? How much? And on Global Gateway, we have said last year that you have to change your approach. You have to go out from the capital, if you sit in Zambia and Lusaka, and if we talk about the Lubito corridor, which can be a train, we're not sure it's a train or it's a road, it's like 500-kilometer stretch. So of course you need to go out and talk to those in the villages of this 500-kilometer stretch. And we have experts who go out there, talk to those, identify them, and say these are the sectors, really specific, the people who are impacted, those who also have thematic civil society and have, a kind of knowledge about the system, especially if you talk to critical raw materials. And then they have very regularly discussed with them from the very first draft of the project via the implementation. Now, I think the different views we have is also that of course takes its time. Because if you go out, and I have my expert doing that, they have missions for 2 or 3 weeks, and they do it all in these 80 countries, you can imagine that cannot be done from one day to the other. But I think that we are doing, and this is something that we have not done in this systematic way in the past 50 years. And I'm very happy, and I see this global gateway. The first thing is you see it a little bit critical, but if you look what we do, and that all these investments basically is just the core of it. My colleagues are not working on the road, how big, how long she is, but they're working around this, how this is really translated into the benefit to the local people with the civil society. So before we heard local value chains. So if we talk about a harbor in Ghana, or if we talk the Lobito corridor, my colleagues are really talking with the governments, but also talking with the civil society. What is there is a value that can help you to have more jobs, to have more small companies, and that you prosper, and then you are better off than before. So it can be cacao, it can be that the regulation needs to be changed, it can be that there needs cooperation. So it's all the thing that is around this big investment, whether it's health, whether it's jobs, whether it's a course at university, so that at the end, not as the other actors in the world, I'm not naming the name, coming in, building a road with their own workers and then go out. We want the government of the country to build the road. We have pre-installed and thought about the whole chain about it so that the villages and the cities and the people around have the jobs with high environmental protection, and then they will have a better life than before. That is a little bit the strategy and the thinking behind the Global Gateway and how we see civil society interacting in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene. Sean, I'll come to you. Well, what's your response to what Marlene said in relation to the Global Gateway? Do you recognise that it's not comparable to, like many people do compare it to the China Belt and Road Initiative, right? So, but Marlene is saying it's not like that, it's much more altruistic and it's not about it as transactional. What's your own reflection?
I suppose my reflection is based on this sort of organisation that we are with 400 partners across the world. Africa, Asia, Latin America, and many people here in this room today work for organisations with those deep roots into communities through our local partners. And for us, the 2 things we worry about is, one was the aid cuts and the fundamental changing of the aid architecture. And one can see that as being just about budget cuts or realignment of budgets. But we also know there was big political objectives behind that.
Indeed.
And some very much coming from the extreme right. But also if we look at how those aid cuts were administered, and you look at who got hit first and who got hit hardest, it was organisations working on gender and women's empowerment, it was organisations working on climate justice, it was organisations working in the forefront of human rights, it was women-led organisations. So we shouldn't be under the illusion that the aid cuts were just about budget.
Yeah.
Some of them were deliberately politically motivated. So we worry about the aid cuts, but the other thing we worry about, getting to Marlene's point about Global Gateway, is what I would see as the repurposing of aid. And from the start of the EU's instruments on aid, like from the very start, what was at the heart of it was the elimination, eradication, and reduction of poverty. And now what we see more and more is a narrative around win-win. And the idea, that, and you put it very well about some of the instruments, say, for example, that fund civil society, while also having large amounts of money, much bigger money going to, I would see as European private interests to implement large infrastructure projects, particularly in Africa. But the question of this win-win is it really a win-win? Mm-hmm. And if we look at how, for example, in our work, one of the projects that you mentioned, Global Gateway, was in Honduras. And we and our partners don't believe that there was proper engagement with local communities. In a context where a project, large dam being implemented with loans, co-financed by the European Union, and then local partners working in a context where it is the 5th most dangerous country in the world for human rights defenders. And we have had cases of partners murdered, attacked, etc. So the rights and value that the European Union needs to uphold through this is essentially important. And what I would say is that if we look at how aid is going to, how the aid instruments of the European Union are going to be progressed over the next number of years. Marlene, you talked about for the benefit of local people. I 100% agree that that's what it's about. But what I really question sometimes is the lack of focus on poverty, the lack of focus on rights, compared to the clear focus on the economic instruments and the benefit, for example, for companies from member states to win large infrastructure projects. Like we have seen, trickle-down economics has not worked in many countries. It has just driven inequality. And I think Global Gateway has the potential to just drive further inequality by advantaging a small section of the population. So for us, I think that the elimination of poverty needs to remain at the center of this. We are talking about large amounts of money in contexts where sometimes the consultation is not genuine. And just back to one of your points about Vietnam. So I spent the last 3.5 years in Vietnam. My criticism of the MFF in Vietnam was the complete absence of poverty in the document and the lack of focus on ethnic minorities in Vietnam, who are the poorest part of the population, but also the most politically disadvantaged. No representation, almost unseen in public life, in political life, etc. And a document where there is no mention of the ethnic minorities of Vietnam, to me, is not a document that fully represents the full value of the European Union. So I think that there are opportunities here for civil society. I really welcome the project you talk about and the 50 million in terms of supporting civil society. But I think we who work on the civil society side have to see this in the whole. The European Union is now the largest, biggest donor left standing.
We still are, and
yeah,
we will be.
And will be, considering what the US have done and what the UK and Germany and others are doing. Yeah. So you're the last one left standing. So our plea is that as the last one left standing, with 10% of the world's population still living in extreme poverty, they should be at the center of the design. And we don't see this win-win delivering for those people.
Sean, thank you very much. I think it's great that we're having an honest conversation up here today ahead of the presidency. And it's a very important point that you make as well, Sean, that the EU is the biggest driver and deliverer of humanitarian aid to all across the world, including Palestinian territories and so on. But Sean makes some very important points there, in particular around the trajectory of political objectives that have existed when it comes to European policy, whether it's gender equality, poverty, human rights and so on. That has been diminished, and we know that. And obviously the Commission, is only one body within the European Union. The Council and the Member States are really forceful on these issues. But also the repurposing of aid as well, and the absence of things like human rights as part of the priorities for the European Union, because I guess when it comes to development, civil society and so on, no better place can the EU reflect its values. So if you could respond to some of those points that Sean made, and thanks very much for doing it as well.
I'm so happy
really
to
welcome
be here.
You're here to do that, by the way.
Because my first point, and I have to say to the audience, you are Irish, right?
Yes, I'm Irish.
Look, the point he made about the poverty, about that economy and poverty, there's no link and there's no trickling down. And look at Ireland. Where have you been before being a member of the European Union. And where are you now? Was there trickling down of the economy a little bit? Yes, there was, because Ireland, in terms of, the average economic and where you have been as a country where there's a huge immigration in the 60s and 70s, and where are you now? I go to the pubs and I just see Italians, and there was another one yesterday from Argentina. So, with all respect, your first argument.
This is a good debate.
That economy is not helping reducing poverty.
But I don't think you're talking about Ireland. We're talking about poverty anyway.
In general,
those
he says poverty. He has questioned the way. What I try to do and to say is, if you want to reduce poverty in a country, and Ireland is a prime example. You cannot go there and just say we do schooling, we do health, what would be really people-centered in what you think it is, and it's part of it. But we see in Ireland, we see in other countries, and I have to name again China, we don't like it. But the number of people who have been in absolutely poverty 20, 30, 40 years ago, and now have a better life, that is partly due that they have changed the way they develop their economy. And that is why when you say that poverty is not the main end what we do, I will not agree with you. I say the European Union, in terms of our values, it's in the treaty, no council, no Ireland, no presidency, no me, no anybody can change it. Our treaty is our constitution, and you know how difficult it is to change constitutions, right? This we have, human rights is in there. Everything you said in terms of values and civil society, it's not only me, it's the council. Now, in terms of the money, I also disagree with you, and with you.
With all of you.
Because, yes, it is very difficult to count, because I do not have a computer. Can you imagine 100 countries? I cannot even check what he has said, because I'm not sitting there at the computer with all the examples, and everything, what all my colleagues are doing around the world. There are 100 countries, can you imagine? And then in all these 100 countries, I have given the money to another civil society and to Moses, so can I not prove, and I cannot maybe count every single cent that we spend. But that's what I did, because it's part of my job. I will try with the means I have to come to a very, very close estimate how much we have given to civil society, not only my small budget, but all of it, and how much is giving to civil society at the end. Concord, here, and in all the countries. And what does it reveal? That from the overall budget, by the way, we are increasing the budget for development cooperation from now in the future. Others have reduced it, we're increasing. That's a proposal of my institution, my commission. And in that, I can say, please, the number, I think it's incredible, that for the moment, it's 14%, 1/4, of all the money that we spend in all the countries on development cooperation, including the roads, whatever you have, the hospitals, and in fragile countries, everything, 1/4, 14% goes to civil society around the world. And this is more now than it has been 5 or 6 years ago. So what I claim here is that we have been very strong in civil society. We are stronger in terms of talking to them, in terms of financing, and we will also continue to do so, because all these empirical data and everything that I get from the council, from you, also from other civil societies, that should continue. So unfortunately, I have data that is not possible to open up for all the colleagues and for Concord, but this is what we have. And in this way, I think we have really a strong record. And as many as you have negative examples, and I would have to check, I have a positive example. So it's for you to decide.
Did you want to come in there real quick?
Yeah, I think my question is not about poverty not being a focus, just to be clear. My question is largely about poverty being at the very center of everything that program design is about. So I've seen European Union projects and I've seen the impact of them. I met with ECHO 2 weeks ago in Kenya on their program in Somalia. I think ECHO have an absolutely unbelievable program in Somalia. So I am not questioning in any way that the European Union has not contributed massively to poverty outcomes. But I am asking the question on behalf of lots of organizations that we work with in this space is, as we go forward on the design of the new instruments, is poverty at the very, very center of the development instruments that is going to basically drive the largest amount of money in the space over the next 10 years. And when the European Union talks about a win-win, is poverty and the rights of local communities truly at the very center? Or is it one instrument among others that's looked at in driving the development agenda? So that is the question that I'm asking, because you're right, the European budget is much bigger than the development budget, right? The European Union budget and all the work that it does in Europe and around the world. Our particular question is on the core objective of the development budget. And if poverty alleviation, human rights, climate justice and gender equality is not at the very center of that budget, then I think there are questions for all of us.
I think the only where we do not agree is the tool, how you get there. Because that you have not explained. You talk about poverty reduction, but you do not explain how you get there. I have said this is the aim. It is still at the very core, whatever you say, human rights, transparency, this is all really at the core. The only difference between us is the tool. And there, after 50 years of doing development cooperation, we have to be very honest that have we really succeeded in massively reducing poverty around the world? And then we have to be very sad. Look, we did not.
Well, we did.
We did in a sense, but it's not, if you look at, you mentioned all these countries, what is there to do in work of civil society, in democracy, in human rights? What is there in poverty reduction? There's so much to do. And that is why there was a thinking behind saying maybe we should change. We should change the way we do it. And this is where the European Union, and it's not only the Commission, but it's also you as a member state, the Irish have said, look, let's try a new form. And this form is what I have said before. It's at the core is an investment, but it's not the investment that we're doing per se. But it's all around, because we believe that around this investment, we can provide the jobs and we can provide the prosperity we need that the people then thrive. And rather than having the small budget we have, giving in a thematic, in a very specific way. And we do know, I mean, you all have been in countries where, like Iran or any country where, you say, okay, they have invested much in university. And then so what? People do not have the jobs. And then, not Iran, but the guy from Argentina came here. This is what we did in the past. And yes, it's good to finance schools and people have the education at the university, but if they do not have jobs afterwards.
Okay. Do you know, I'm going to interrupt there because I know Celia and Mose really want to get in. Celia, you want to get in real quick first, and then we go to Mose.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I hear you, Marine, very loud and clear. Make no mistake, I think that we're all singing from the same hymn book here that Global Gateway as a worldwide investment vehicle can actually deliver, but there are a number of concerns, and I think it's those concerns that need to be attended to. And I think civil society here is going to be able to play a critical role in making sure that we're able to tighten the nuts and the bolts.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we're really not pressing a very high premium on investment volume. We're not pressing a high premium on infrastructure and geopolitical, geostrategic interests of Europe. I think some of the concerns, I mean, if I take from my position where I come from, as from sub-Saharan Africa, is that what we're looking at now is that the concern is that there is a bit of a conflation between development cooperation and the geostrategic interests of Europe, which could actually include, among others, extraction of critical minerals, which would actually also include increasing the competitiveness of the corporate, European corporate entities. And that's where perhaps the challenge comes, where corporate interests are being conflated with development cooperation. And I think from where I stand, and civil society organizations can really help the Global Gateway to deliver for as long as we're able to transit from the Global Gateway being just an investment agenda, but a people-centered agenda, an accountability agenda, and a participation agenda. Okay. And what we're saying here is that it's really vitally important that we're not, as we pay attention to infrastructure development, we are not sacrificing the soft issues of human rights, governance, democracy, accountability on the altar of the visibles. And we just need to be clear about that. And I think also the other thing is, I'm no spokesperson for the EU, but if I was EU, one of the things that I would really want to sell out there is that we're not looking at the Global Gateway as a counter of China's development of the Belt Road Initiative. Because in many instances, it has been looked as such. You're looking, China is overtaking Africa through the Belt Road Initiative, looking at infrastructure development, looking at aspects of visibles, which are many of our politicians like. And this is like, it's crowding up the space. And then here comes the Global Gateway. Now, it shouldn't be looked at as such. And perhaps it was never made as such. But I think there is quite a bit of a mirror reflection of the Belt Road Initiative and the Global Gateway. And it's going to be incumbent upon the Commission to try and demystify that and say, look, we would like to pay attention to accountability. We would like to pay attention to human rights, democracy, governance, and actual aspects of poverty and inequality, which SIN is making attention to.
Thanks, Moses. Celia, before we go to the audience.
Yeah, I want to pick up a little bit on what Moses was saying, because I think we all agree within the Global Gateway, there are some good foundations that need to be built on that could deliver for people. But what we also know is that, large economic developments can broaden inequalities. They can deepen poverty. Yeah. And I think these things need to be tackled quite deliberately. Yeah. And in the communication and a lot of the action we've seen around Global Gateway in the last years, that hasn't been the focus. The focus had been the competitiveness aspect, what Europe gets from it. And I think we need a lot of reassurance that those other aspects really will be tended to. And I think the evidence is still weak on that. On paper, it's okay. In practice, we don't know. The other thing is what you were saying about crowding out other issues. I think we're very concerned that the Global Gateway becomes sort of the only aspect of the EU's sort of international presence. And in fact, there are other things that have to happen, because all of the expectations that Marlene has sort of piled into what development can do, they go far beyond the aid budget. There are all sorts of ways that the EU has an impact on other countries through trade, through debt relations, through taxation, all sorts of things. And the aid budget should never have been expected to solve all of the problems of poverty. But what it can do is work on human rights, work on gender equality, address the issues of minorities, look at poverty and inequalities. And I think we want to see that there is some space within the Global Europe instrument also for different kinds of approaches that are not this Global Gateway approach.
Yeah. I'll stop there. Thank you. We have a mic. Would anyone like to put a question or make a point to our... there you go, this gentleman here. If you can just give us your name and your organisation, please, sir.
Thanks very much.
Should be on. Give it a go there.
Maybe you can hear me if I project my voice. I'm a singer.
Oh, are you? Okay. Yeah.
My name is Here, just take the microphone, just be easier, yeah.
I think it was really instructive that we used Ireland as a case study for how we bring about development, how we reduce poverty levels. And I think, what happened in Ireland economically didn't just fall out of the sky, right? I think it's important that we reflect on decisions by successive Irish governments to invest in universally free quality education. I think there was deliberate investment in third level education as well. I think it's also important to remember that when Ireland really began to develop economically, there was a massive revolution in transparency in what happened in Ireland. There was a raft of tribunals, and there was a real opening up, a real scrutiny of government. So I think, trickle-down economics is all very well, but it happens in a context. Yes. And you cannot ignore fundamental aspects of human development as a foundation to allow economic development to bring about poverty alleviation. And that's where I think the Global Gateway has a bit of a blind spot. We really need to invest in education. You really need to invest in sustainable food systems. Yep. You need to invest in healthcare systems. And on that foundation, you can develop sustainable and just economic development that will alleviate poverty and reduce inequality. Thanks.
Would you agree that the Global Gateway has a blind spot in those areas? Would you agree with that point?
I think it's two things, okay? One is, I would call it now a little bit a defense argument I have. It's not a nice position to in, but we also have to see what Mr. said very rightly, that in an ideal scenario where I would have the money to do all that, what he said in this 100, what is he called, Mr.? Fergal. Fergal, if I would have the money, even in one country, to do all what you expect us to do, and I would have the government who would agree to that, I would happy to do it. My defense point is that my institution has even, they had a chutzpah in the sense of asking even much more than we had in the past. And we might not be likely to even have the same budget as we had before, because I don't know how Ireland stands, but I know that Germany, France, and Italy, they do want us to give us less. So 30%. I have less money, and what I have is very little, okay? So even if the government would say, okay, Ireland, and Mr. Douglas, he's right, I have to change everything and do exactly as Ireland, then I'm fine. Even if he would do it in a really ideal scenario, I would not have the means to do all that, what you say it's necessary, right? So if you do not have the means, you have to make choices, right? Yeah. And then if you make choices, one of the choice was, okay, if I give €1 to a hospital, then with this €1 I can pay something for €1. Then we said, okay, we do it differently. I put not even €1 aside, then I can guarantee a loan for 100. And the bank gives a loan to this government for 100. So I have 100 times more of the value. So this is the choices that we had to make. And it's limited by what the government do. It's limited by the means. So we pull there where we think there is a kind of, not trickling down, but there will be from this project, because it includes also education. For example, what we do in Rwanda it is, where it is the health vaccination factory. Yes, there's a factory, and this factory, Bontech, will make money with producing vaccinations. But we funded university courses so that in the factory, the chemists can be from Rwanda and not come from China or from Ireland, right? So we do invest in the education, but it's linked to this project. And there we hope that for a similar project all around, they will just not be the core of something which would include much more. And at the end, it will be the government itself who can invest with the taxes they get into the education system and the rest of the system, what you say is necessary for having this kind of development. And the last point I want to make is that it's not always a kind of dichotomy, private against civil society or so. My favorite example I have is critical raw materials Bolivia. Our EU interest, we all know we need to have batteries and electrical cars, so we need the critical raw materials. We know Bolivia has it. I'm not funding somebody to explore these critical raw materials. At the most, the European Commission gives a loan to the government gives this to a company. It could be a European. And what we have done with the civil society is we sat with them down on the table and said, okay, if that is coming, they're not coming yet, what is your concern? And it's not for them to say we don't want it because there is a problem with the water. The kind of dialogue we have is a constructive one, where we say, okay, what is it your concern? It's the water, okay. And then they say, look, there is no legislation on lithium in Bolivia, no environmental standards. And now the European Commission, we are helping and pushing for the government to make a legislation. So it's very much about trying to make these two, which are, you think that are dichotomy, you know, bringing them together, but for the sake of both. And just a last point. I mean, I don't know where Ireland stands in terms of saving money in the public budgets, but I do know that in many European countries, especially on the town level, they need to save money because there is not enough. So they close down swimming pools and whatever. And in this kind of scenario, I have to justify, the European Commission has to justify for every single euro that I spend on hospitals somewhere else, when in the member states there is a cut. And this is also why also your government is saying, look, I still do it, we will put more money in that, but at the same time, Elena, you have to show us really what comes out in terms of poverty reduction, but maybe also in case that our European companies have more businesses abroad. So in my example, whether an Irish company would do it or Argentina, at the end does not change because, okay, the company will make the money, but I will make sure, A, that the environmental standards are high and that the good jobs will not be given to somebody else, but the good jobs and the local economic development is for the benefit of the people.
Okay, thank you so much. And anybody else? That gentleman there with the hat. Can we get the mic over, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is it working? Yeah. Before I introduce myself, I'd like to acknowledge a campaign in 2005 by the NGOs in Ireland, which resulted in landmines being eliminated. So that's something to celebrate. Now, for those who haven't met in the previous life or this life, my name is Adekunle Gomez, and 12 days ago, I was marking 45 years in Ireland.
Congratulations.
2 years ago, Jenan made reference to the collective voice and the excluded voices. Now, 2 years ago, Minister Sean Farrell suggested that there should be Southern voices to inform the program of Irish Aid. So I was very kind of refreshing to hear Moses' contribution from, if you like, the ground. Now, the minister's suggestion, what I understood is that now those from the Southern Hemisphere living here have got, if you like, a feet in both countries. They grew up in those countries, and they are living here, so they probably are best know to communicate. My question is, this policy document, what contribution did people from the Southern Hemisphere have in it, and are we going to have that contribution over the next 6 months? Thank you.
Thank you. Moses, do you want to take that?
Yeah. Thank you. At the risk of being prescriptive, let me say this, that the Global Gateway, which we've actually spent quite some time talking about, will actually be stronger if civil society is not just involved in consultation or communication, but perhaps right from terms of identifying the priorities, being able to be part of monitoring the implementation, and being able to identify risks and the impact of communications. As a person from the Global South, let me say that the question is not about whether the global civil society can align to EU priorities, but whether actually the EU priorities can remain connected to our priorities. And make no mistake, we are not beneficiaries of anyone's agenda. Civil society actors in the Global South have their own analysis. They've got their own constituency. They've got their own priorities and political legitimacy. And communities do not want development to be done on them. They do not want development to be done for them. They're actually looking for doing development with everybody. And so, listening to the people that are perhaps in the room, whether it is ActionAid, whether it's Oxfam, whether it's Trocare, whether it is Dóchas, is going to be really important that, during the time as, Ireland takes on the presidency, and we in the South are perhaps looking at you with both of our eyes, and we were looking for European partners, not patrons. We're looking for European partners that can enable us to be part of the design process of some of these interventions so that they can actually be able to succeed. And the European Union Sea project, it really, it's a good initiative. It's a good initiative and can be a genuine partner. The EU can be a genuine partner when it listens to civil society. Listening to civil society's evidence and using that evidence to act better, to understand better, and be able to provide space for dialogue. I think there are a couple of things here that perhaps I would like to mention here. One is that moving beyond aid is not about moving beyond responsibility. And if we are actually saying that the Global Gateway project is actually country-led, it's important that doesn't mean that it's government alone, that civil society are going to be pivotal in the implementation of these large infrastructure projects. And local ownership is vitally important. And so the criticism that often may come doesn't mean that there is no value, there is no premium when it comes to the infrastructure development. That's important. But how do we ensure that the social indicators of our communities are remaining on top priority? How do we ensure, and this is a challenge for Ireland as you take on the EU presidency. You're taking on the EU presidency at a fairly difficult time when the DAC, ODA is reducing, other foreign aid is tumbling, the global philanthropy ecosystem is perhaps in demise, and we're really not seeing that perhaps any one bloc like the EU can be able to plug that gap. I think it's going to be looking at how civil society can play a critical role in this new development cooperation. And there are opportunities that we can actually present, there are challenges, there are concerns which need attention. But you can count on the civil society partners as partners that can actually be partners of choice.
And I'm just going to give everyone a last word. Maybe just go to you, Sean, next.
To that question, I think it's a challenge to all of us, actually, not just to colleagues from the European Commission or the European delegations. It is the question, really, of localization and locally led development and where we see development being really owned and driven from. And it's a challenge. A former colleague of mine, Noreen, used to always remind us that it's more than the money and that the transfer of money is never enough when it comes to local empowerment and localization. It is about, in the decisions that are made, where is representation for local communities, local actors. It is in places where programs are designed.
Yep.
Where is local voice and local ownership then? So I would take that as not just a challenge in terms of Global Gateway. I think there are places where Global Gateway could be a lot stronger on civil society engagement, particularly in design phase, and I think local civil society would have lots to say about the poverty agenda in particular in the design of projects around Global Gateway. But I do take the challenge as a challenge to all of us that operate in the development space around truly understanding and being honest about how and where we share power, because ultimately it comes down to power more than money. But thanks for the question.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sean. Marlene, last word, not last word, second.
No, but
last word
Sean
to you.
always gives me the perfect kind of argument for my argument. Thank you so much.
That wasn't my intention, by the way.
That's not what he says.
No, that's even nicer. No, what you said about the design and the civil society should be really in the design, in the implementation, also in the monitoring. That would be my very last point, because what I did not mention is that in this Global Gateway, I think for the very, very first time in development cooperation that we do, you as European civil society have a voice, but already at the very, very beginning of the design. Because what our system is now is that the project, the proposals for these big projects that I was mentioning about should come from the member states. So should come from Dublin. And I know that we have a state secretary, is it here? Mm-hmm. We have really asked all these, what we call Team National, to include civil society. So if you do not have a seat around the table, I would very much hope that you knock at the door and say, Marlene Häuser from the European Commission has said that we are allowed, we should sit with the EU, and together with you, think what kind of projects in the countries you are interested should be done and how they should be done to really decrease poverty, as Sean has said. So that will be my last point. Please make sure that you're at the table, because this is for the very first time that we have in a design, not only at the end in the countries where we talk about in our offices, but you are at the start of this whole design program.
Last word to you, Celia.
Thanks. I mean, I think, we wanted to, in this discussion, also address what opportunities there are coming up under the Irish presidency. And I do think it's important to flag some, because we've talked a bit about, the locally led ownership aspect of Global Gateway, and how can it have a strong commitment to poverty and inequalities reduction and really embed that in the ways of working. And I think Ireland as a country has a track record on human rights, on working with civil society, on having this kind of poverty focus in its work. So I think it's a very credible actor to put those topics on the table. But I think, an aspect we haven't talked about that much is mutual. So the Global Gateway is always framed as mutual benefits. But we haven't talked a lot about mutual accountability. The accountability always seems to go upwards towards the EU sort of as an institution. And I think really it should be the other way around. It should be going to the people who are supposedly benefiting from this. And that links to kind of a broader discussion that's sort of in the background of many of the things we've said today. We've been talking about the kind of the shocks to the aid system and how sort of the EU is the last man standing. And I think there is an opportunity also under the Irish presidency to advance that discussion about what position the EU wants to take in future forms of international cooperation. There's been a lot of sort of different levels of international discussion on that. And, do we want the EU's future international cooperation to be really anchored in something that was inspired by competition? Or do we want it to be inspired by something that's much more linked to cooperation, to working together, to tackling global challenges together, to this question of trust? So, I mean, there is a debate to be had about where the fair share of responsibilities lies for different global challenges, where the resources should come from. Do we still want to have peace, prosperity, and progress at the centre of these things? And these are the kinds of discussions that we don't hear a lot under Global Gateway. So I think there's an opportunity also for the Irish presidency to bring these topics forward.
And I think, thank you very much for bringing that up, because that's actually going to be very much part of our next panel. So perfect segue, Celia, and thanks a million for joining us on this panel, in particular Marlene Holzner from DG International Partnerships, who came over from Brussels this morning and answered a lot of our questions. Of course, to Sean Farrell, CEO of Trócaire, Celia Cranfield from Concord Europe, and Dr. Moses Zuba, Executive Director of Uganda National CSO Platform. Thank you very much. And sorry, my microphone there. I won't stand up. I think I can now introduce Neale Richmond, TD and Minister for State for International Development and Diaspora at the Department of Foreign Affairs. Hi, Neale. Yeah, come on in. You're very welcome. Nice to see you. You well? How's it going? Nice to see you.
Great to see you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Shona, it's great to be with you and not talking about Brexit. You know, 10 years on this day, it feels like we have not left.
I knew you'd fit it in somehow, which
yeah,
you
I just
did
thought I'd go
there,
from
first,
the get-go.
first sentence. Yep.
It's out of the way now, I can move on. Ladies and gentlemen, I was asked as I was coming in, we were taking photos, and they were like, is this a smiling photo or is this a sad and depressed photo? And I'm going to try my best to combine all emotions in one. But I do want to leave you this morning with an ask and indeed some sort of optimism. From the get-go, I'm really so grateful to Dóchas for bringing you all together for their launch of their programme. And I'm so grateful to see Deputy Donncha O'Leary from Sinn Féin here. And I'd like to think I'm not the most typical politician, but I would like to credit Deputy O'Leary for consistently raising the plight of the most vulnerable in the world in the Oireachtas, for putting myself and Minister McEntee under pressure benevolently at oral parliamentary questions and at committee meeting, and to have constructive and productive opposition and to have that level of depth and understanding in the committee is really supportive when we are facing a very difficult time. So Donncha, amazing to see you here, and looking forward indeed from hearing from Barry Ward after this. At the outset, it is really also so good to see so many of our Irish Aid partner organisations here for what is a really important discussion. And as you know, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing, we're literally less than 1 week from the start of Ireland's 8th presidency of the Council of the European Union. This is something that is hugely important, and it is great that we can use this as a focus for our discussion, and I'll go into some detail. On a personal note, I've very fond memories of the 2013 presidency. I was a much younger man, considerably younger man, working on the presidency for European Movement Ireland, where it was our job to bring together civic society to engage with the presidency. It was a really difficult time coming out of the financial crash, but we were able to do so, and I think if we can repeat this year what was achieved in 2013, we'll all be in a better place. But the challenge, ladies and gentlemen, is strong. As you will be aware, on the 10th of June, the government published our own programme, and I am sure you'll have seen we are determined to focus on the key issues that have already been raised today and will be raised later on in the day. In developing the programme, the government took on board the views of a very considerable number of stakeholders, canvassed through a broad consultation process. Last December, pretty much all of you in this room, at least most of you, attended a really, really good stakeholder consultation in Ivy House, which had over 80 representatives from civil society organisations, development and humanitarian organisations, universities, researchers, private sector, government agencies, and indeed youth representatives in particular. I took a lot from that event and from your extremely valuable contributions, including your recommendations for the next EU budget, the MFF. Overall, the public consultation process more broadly received over 500 written submissions, with over 37% of responses being submitted by the NGO, civil society and non-profit sectors. These submissions from across the island, representing a diverse sectoral and geographic perspective, very much pointed to a presidency focused on delivery, but crucially grounded in values. And I'll touch on that again in a second. And I really do want to thank those of you who contributed to that really constructive engagement. But I also want to thank you for your programme that Dóchas is launching today, showing that EU engagement is for absolutely everyone. I am pleased that our own programme is reflective of our consultations, while of course focusing on the priorities of the European Union and all of its member states. Ireland's presidency comes at a crucial time for global development cooperation. Preliminary OECD figures show that official development assistance from Development Assistance Committee member countries and associates fell by over 23% between 2024 and 2025, the largest annual drop ever. I don't need to tell you here that these cuts are affecting most severely the furthest behind, including persons with disabilities in least developed countries and other fragile contexts. To be quite blunt, these cuts are costing lives. We are living in a time that is not defined by one single crisis, but by multiple devastating crises, often interlocking and protracted. Severe crises are being witnessed in Ukraine, in Palestine, Sudan, the Great Horn of Africa, the Sahel, the Eastern DRC and Great Lakes region, and of course the wider Middle East. Humanitarian needs globally are rising at an unprecedented rate in all these contexts, but also in other places like Haiti, Myanmar and Afghanistan, where Ireland also works to keep these issues and these areas in the spotlight. Progress in tackling the central challenges of poverty and hunger has slowed. The conflict in the Gulf and the disruption it has caused will continue to have a huge impact on global food security. While we might hope to see a return to previous trading patterns, the long disruption is a systematic shock to the global agri-food system and leaves the world on the brink of a historic hunger emergency. The conflict has already triggered additional humanitarian needs, leading to a displacement of populations. The countries that will be most affected are already amongst the poorest and most fragile. Small island developing states and least developed countries are also bearing the heaviest burden when it comes to the effects of climate change, often being hit hardest by climate disasters that they did not cause. For many of you in this room, this presentation of the current context is sadly all too familiar. You are actively working to provide humanitarian response and support the most vulnerable populations, delivering life-saving services in the most difficult of circumstances. I'm setting out this context, and this is the backdrop to our presidency that will begin in a week. Ireland has long recognised these complex challenges. I have seen firsthand the impact of Ireland's long-term development programmes to help bring about positive change in the lives of people around the world. I have witnessed the impact of life-saving humanitarian funding that is fast and flexible, reaching those who need it most. Where others have stepped back from commitment to supporting those in need, our unwavering commitment continues, increasing our support for the furthest behind, increasing our budget for development cooperation, including humanitarian assistance. We will continue to show leadership in international aid with a continued strong focus on underfunded and neglected emergencies. But global challenges cannot be solved by one country alone. The collective position of the EU and its member states as the largest global development actor is more vital than ever before. This reinforces what has been chosen by the government as the central theme of our upcoming presidency, which is the Irish proverb, Níor go cur le chéile, meaning strength with unity. Our EU presidency will ensure that we will make an important contribution in leading the work of the EU at a time when unity is ever more important in the face of rising global challenges. The Irish EU presidency will focus on its efforts on enhancing the competitiveness of our European economy, safeguarding the values of our union at home and abroad, and providing for the security of our citizens. These three thematic pillars of competitiveness, values and security are interlocking and will guide the government's work as presidency. We will work intensively on proposals within each pillar, as well as on priorities, including our ongoing support for Ukraine and our global engagement. In an uncertain time, we will work to strengthen and stabilise the EU's relationships with neighbours and with our partners across the world. During this presidency, Ireland will host about 270 meetings involving ministers and officials from across Europe, including the largest high-level meeting in the history of the state, a meeting of the European political community. The scale and complexity of our agenda will evidently be greater than in any of our previous presidencies, and we know that rightly expectations are sky high. That also applies to the agenda relating to development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. Ireland's presidency will support strategic level dialogue on the future of development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. In layman's terms, we want to save the development infrastructure. We want to stop the backsliding and reverse it to make sure that we get back to where we are. The gains of the last 25 years have been real when it comes to development cooperation. They are being undone at a striking pace due to political decisions of others and due to an ill-thought-out and misplaced culture war. During our presidency, I will host an informal Foreign Affairs Council on Development meeting in Dublin, at which I will work with our European partners to discuss the very considerable issues we face, considering the future of development cooperation, the enduring challenge of global poverty, and how the EU can forge a path forward together. We have not had informal meetings of the development cooperation stream of the Foreign Affairs Council under the last two presidencies. We very much are putting this back on the agenda, and we hope and expect other member states to follow. Because this conversation is vital now, because it is in the interests of the EU to be a reliable and principled partner for the long term. As global stability weakens, reliability is a key strength. It'll help us remain engaged in a rapidly changing world. The European story itself is an example of great hope to many in the world, a union that delivers for its people. We must be true to our origins and share our values. The primary objective of EU development policy is the reduction and, in the long term, eradication of poverty. This is not a choice. This is committed to and is a responsibility within the treaties. The policy has been built on efforts targeted to eradicate poverty, reduce vulnerabilities, and address inequalities. Development efforts must focus on poverty to reduce global and national inequalities and foster stability and security. Ireland's presidency will prioritise progress on our collective commitment to reaching the furthest behind, emphasising collaborative, forward-thinking discussion on reducing humanitarian need. We will ensure that a strong focus on principle and needs-based humanitarian assistance in response to the most severe crises, including those in Ukraine, Palestine, Sudan and the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, Eastern DRC, Great Lakes region and the Middle East. We will ensure that neglected crises receive the attention they need. In addition to the FAC development in Dublin, I'll co-host a high-level conference on the protection of aid workers with Commissioner Hadja Labib, European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management. Pursuing agreement on the new EU multi-annual financial framework is an overarching priority for the Irish presidency. At its core, the EU's long-term budget is an expression of our priorities, and the Global Europe instrument will substantially shape the funding and direction of international development architecture from 2028. We have heard your asks at the Stakeholder Engagement Forum last year through meetings and submissions for the EU's external action budget to maintain the EU's leadership on development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. We are committed, of course, to our chairing role, negotiating workable compromises for an ambitious EU budget that will see the Union come through the coming decade. The world has seen much change in the course of the current MFF. We are very aware of the responsibility now to ensure the EU is ready to face the unpredictable and the uncertain with a structured and reliable framework. The importance of development cooperation and humanitarian assistance are vital to this discussion. During our presidency, at all levels, we will bring a focus to the need for collective action when it comes to food security and nutrition. Ireland is a long-standing champion of global efforts to reduce hunger and malnutrition, priority issues firmly rooted in our own history of famine. Food security and nutrition are inextricably linked to peace and stability, poverty reduction, and economic prosperity. We are deeply concerned about the immediate and long-term impact of the conflict in the Gulf on global food security. Ireland will support discussions on sustainable food systems to look to identify short, medium and long-term investments that the EU can make to advance global food and nutrition security. We will highlight the role that the Global Gateway strategy can play in generating inclusive economic growth. But I will say this, as I said at every meeting, Global Gateway is not a replacement for development cooperation and should never, ever be viewed as such. Advancing the rights and empowerment of all women and girls in society is foundational for global sustainable development, peace and security, and acts as a catalyst for economic growth and good governance. As presidency, Ireland will aim to shepherd an ambitious European agenda on gender equality and the rights and empowerment of all women and girls, strengthening the Union's role as a principled global actor. Ireland will work through our presidency to continue to prioritise the global health agenda, facilitating discussions on the EU's new Global Health Resilience Initiative. We will encourage reflection on the reforms needed to the global health architecture, including on financing, support for a strong multilateral system, and an enhanced coordination. Climate change is having a significant impact across the development agenda. As COP31 will fall during Ireland's presidency, Ireland will be leading and coordinating the EU at the next COP, working to assist small island developing states, least developed countries, and fragile and conflict-affected areas to adapt to climate change. The EU has a critical role in protecting the international legal order, democracy, peace building and multilateralism. The Irish presidency will reaffirm the EU's central role in shaping a more effective multilateral development system, revitalising progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, delivery of the Paris Climate Agreement, principled humanitarian action and follow-up on the Seville Commitment on Finance for Development, recognising the interdependence of these agendas. Democratic values are deliberately under attack by actors who seek to undermine Europe's values at home, as well as to denigrate democracy's values in contributing to human development. In a context in which we must be ever more focused on our security and geopolitical interests, we will also ensure that our values remain at the centre of Europe's international partnerships, precisely because the development ambitions we share with our partners will not be achieved or sustained without respect for human rights, including the rights of persons with disabilities, participation, representation, transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. We will seek to maintain focus on democratic resilience in our international partnerships by emphasising the 360-degree approach to Global Gateway and the framework outlined in the Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy. We will seek to strengthen the EU's democratic resilience through support for initiatives such as the European Democracy Shield and the EU Strategy for Civil Society. We will underline the importance of ensuring that EU policy and decision-making is informed by our own people and civil society more broadly. These are just some of the priorities and areas of focus during our presidency. Ireland will ensure these priorities are reflected across the high-level events that we will host as part of our presidency, but also through the chairing of a number of working parties at official level relating to development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. However, I know that as presidency we will not be alone in our work to advance progress on these issues. It is clear in reading your presidency programme that there are many shared areas of priority and areas that we wish to bring a focus to during this important period. I flicked to page 5 of the booklet handed to me on my way in, and there are 5 clear asks of what the presidency should do. I will endeavour to achieve all 5 of these. I agree absolutely with all 5 of these. I recognise the responsibility that is thrust on the shoulders of the Irish government and the Irish political system more broadly over the coming months to make sure that we work to achieve these 5 key things, and I am very grateful for them being put out in such a clear manner and the opportunity to address them. Because I have been delighted to see and support submissions by many of civil society partners to host EU presidency associated events that complement our policy programme. More than 190 associated presidency events are currently planned to support the advance of EU policy objectives and Ireland's presidency priorities, and I know that many of you are working on events and programmes that will focus on areas including climate change, food security, financing for development, child protection and youth action. We've engaged closely with all stakeholders, including civil society, in preparation for this upcoming EU presidency, and we look forward to this continued cooperation, bringing focus and visibility to these priority areas. Civil society will continue to hold a meaningful and important role throughout this presidency in ensuring priority issues are highlighted, and we welcome your active engagement in the months ahead. We know that there is a challenge ahead of us, that our programme is ambitious, and that the eyes of Europe will be on Ireland as we assume responsibility as the presidency, but we know that we can and we will deliver. As a government, we are determined that our 8th presidency will achieve results across the board. We will work with you, with our partners, with the other 26 member states, the Commission and Parliament to ensure a successful presidency. I'm looking forward to what will be a busy 6 months for Ireland, working together to ensure that this presidency delivers for as many as possible. Now, for any officials or diplomats in the room, this is where I give them a mild stroke. I'm not leaving here without a couple of clear asks. It is a great opportunity for me to tell you what we're doing or what we're trying to hope to achieve and where the very real difficulties are. I perhaps have been slightly conservative in laying out just how stark the challenge is globally when it comes to saving the development cooperation infrastructure and the degree of humanitarian despair that unfortunately too many of us see on a daily basis through our collective working lives. We have reached an absolute inflection point where we need to do everything to stop this drift. And the drift is manifold. And it can stop, first and foremost, with the achievement of an EU budget that has ring-fenced development and humanitarian assistance at the levels, at the very minimum that we had before. That's the very minimum ask. We cannot have a situation where the EU and its member states, representing over 50% of the development infrastructure now, throw in Norway and the UK, and we're over 60%. That's what's left. And it has to make sure that we continue that from a budgetary point of view, but crucially, that we continue it from a values point of view. So my asks are very, very clear. Work with us. Work with us in the Irish government, work with us with all Irish partners, parties and partners who believe in development, work with us to make sure we put other member states under pressures, that we put civic society actors in other countries under pressure to make sure they engage with this process and help us to move the agenda on. Secondly, keep us honest. We will work to achieve these goals. We believe in them and we won't be backsliding, but we need to hear your voice. We need to have the critical support and the critical partnership. But within that honesty, we do need people to be realistic. We're not going to move the Irish budget domestically from 0.4% to 0.7% in one budget, as much as I'd like to do that. But I absolutely have the ambition to work with all partners in government and across the Oireachtas to at the very least, maintain our official development assistance for the next Irish budget and at least maintain it from a European context. But we need you as part of that discussion. The future development, as I've mentioned, is under threat. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that the future existence of certain NGO actors or aid agencies, or indeed my role as minister, is my biggest concern. My biggest concern is the tens of millions of people on this earth who rely on development assistance simply to live a life worth living, or indeed simply to exist. Humanity drives us to play a part. Humanity has been lost, crucially, in so many discussions over the last number of years when it comes to geopolitics. And at some stage, we have to stop and say, this is enough. We put it back on the agenda. We put disagreements, party politics, national rivalries to one side, and we deliver what is right. I fundamentally believe we can achieve it. I fundamentally believe that we have no choice but to achieve it. But we all have to use this opportunity, starting in a week's time, of Ireland's presidency to drive it to a next level. Thank you so much for joining us all this morning, and I really appreciated the chance.